I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld. We're Ireland's top podcast for 2025, and now we've got a new website. So if you want to learn more about crime and criminals, if you want stories, extras, and podcast subscriber specials, go to www.crimeworld.com.
So, Ken, Ireland has not been a hotbed of Islamic terrorist attacks, but there have been. It was a fascinating interview you did where we learned that there has been 10 what's called early interventions to stop, I suppose, this young men really being radicalised. What were you told about this early intervention, and what kind of is it, I suppose?
So, yeah, Niall, this was an interview with the head of the Special Detective Unit, Detective Chief Superintendent Brian Woods. It would be quite rare for someone senior in that particular unit to give an interview. So he had a lot to say, and some of it was very interesting. Just in relation to this whole issue, it's essentially what we're talking about is Islamic terrorist radicalisation.
Yeah.
And the detective pointed out that he has a concern that this particular area is there is a growth in this kind of extremism and radicalisation, particularly among young people. So again, this is something that had never really been disclosed, but over the past number of months, he was saying that the SDU have been involved in around 10 interventions in relation to young people. Not all of them, he said, were juveniles, but he described them as young people. None of these cases have resulted in a criminal prosecution. So the tactic is essentially either the SDU get their own intelligence in relation to young people that are on risk online, or...
So presumably they get this intelligence from, they don't tell us obviously, but it's either from people telling them this guy in the community is starting to, maybe say something in favour of ISIS, or else probably more likely it's what is being said on social media and on the internet in some shape or form.
Yes, they don't say,
They
he didn't go into that, but what he did say as well is that, for want of a better word, they get tip-offs from their international police partners as well, who are monitoring these extremists.
The ways they communicate, like obviously, yes. And we saw a lot of that in the UK where people, would be monitor what they were saying on these chat sites or whatever. So what does the early intervention involve? Presumably it involves coming up and speaking to these people face to face.
It does, and they interact with the community policing, the National Community Policing Unit, but also local Gardaí. So he was making the point that often the individuals that find themselves at risk in relation to this may have isolated existence, and their activities online are basically not known to anybody.
Yeah.
That can include their parents.
Yeah.
So he was basically saying it's a very sensitive area of policing, because the first time in many of these instances that the parents or the responsible adult that's in charge of the young person, or in some cases child, the first that they know that their child is at risk of this kind of stuff is when the Gardaí get involved. And he was saying it can be a huge shock for them to find out for the first time. Yeah.
Now, of course, we've seen in European countries and in the US where these, I suppose what they're described as lone wolf Islamic terrorists, basically people that, as you said, they're not receiving instructions from an organisation as such or logistical support, but they might be getting told information, all right, and they can go out and cause terrible destruction. In Ireland has been not subjected to as many of these types of attacks, thankfully, as say in the UK, but there was one example of this, and that was where a chaplain was brutally attacked in County Galway.
Yes, that's Father Paul Murphy. He was the army chaplain based at Renmore Barracks in Galway, and this happened in August of last year. The boy who stabbed him, who attempted to murder him, which he was actually convicted of earlier this year, it was a very serious knife attack. He was only 16 years old at the time, and later the investigations quickly showed that he had been radicalised. One of the first things he said to arresting Gardaí was comments in relation to our Irish Defence Forces had done an operation in Mali, the African country, and whatever stuff he was looking at online, he had worked himself up that the Irish Defence Forces' presence in that country wasn't justified. And when they raided his home, they found lots of sketchings about beheadings, writings, IS paraphernalia. And when they checked into his web history, they saw that he'd essentially been radicalised to Islamic terrorism.
Yeah, and then I think what happens is they get some advice and some tips or whatever. They get, but they don't. They're really lone wolf sort of operators where, and we've seen the terrible destruction that can be caused in cases in England.
Yes, and unfortunately, and as the detective said in that interview, it is a growing threat. And there is a case that happened here in Dublin a few months ago. I think it was at the start of the summer. We won't name the 23-year-old here for legal reasons, but it was a very high-profile case. It involved a stabbing in the Capel Street area, and it also involved an arson attack in the Crumlin area. All the indications that individual has been charged with these offences, is likely to go on trial at the Special Criminal Court at some stage, is currently in custody. But all the indications are that this 23-year-old who was living in Dublin for all his life, basically, had also been radicalised online.
Yes. Now, the Special Detective Unit, as they're called, I think they were called the Special Branch at one stage, were they?
Yeah.
That change is gone. But they were really, a branch of the Gardaí that were set up, I suppose, to deal with the terrorist threat caused by the Troubles, really, in Ireland. And for the vast majority of their existence, that's what they've been focused on, the IRA in its various forms and other organisations, maybe like the INLA or even loyalist paramilitaries. But the job clearly is changing, because he also spoke in the interview about, I suppose, the monitoring of far-right groups, which has become a much bigger part of their work as well.
Yes, he said it's a significant amount. It's a significant part of their work caseload. They've actually been in existence for 100 years.
Right, okay.
It's their anniversary this year. There was an event held a couple of weeks ago in relation to celebrate the 100 years of existence. So they've seen a lot of different threats, obviously, since 1925. But the far right is one of their main focuses at this point. And the detective basically said it is a growing threat, and it's actually a threat to the security of the state. He outlined a number of different trends, but probably one of the most disturbing of them, it was an arrest operation that happened last month in County Laois. It was a joint operation, actually, between the SDU and PSNI, and two men have been charged before the courts, and a third was also arrested. But he said basically that this was the first time that individuals had met online, or discussed online, and ended up forming a cohesive terrorist structure.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, they spoke openly. They made videos about attacking mosques, IPAS centres, and hotels that were housing asylum seekers. So an operation was put in place, and those arrests and charges happened, but explosives were also found in Northern Ireland, I think County Down as well as County Laois. So very serious stuff.
Yeah, so it's interesting the way he draws a distinction, I suppose, between not everything is a threat to the state, I suppose, when it comes to far-right ideology. So probably the bit that jumped out to a lot of people of that interview was him describing the City West protests as not being primarily driven by the far right. So he's drawing a very clear distinction between sort of, I suppose, a spontaneous protest like the City West, where you might have, far-right agitators or influencers becoming involved in it, maybe hyping it up. And he's also but he's drawing a clear distinction between what he says is a cohesive organisation, which has the potential to be, I suppose, a terrorist threat. And that becomes very much part of the SDU. I mean, even this week we had a video coming out in the north where you had people dressed as paramilitaries threatening to commit violence, and certainly at least presenting themselves as a paramilitary style organisation. I mean, that's fair to say, isn't it? He drew a distinction between the City West kind of situation and the situation that, of course, before the courts in relation to the mosques.
Yeah, Chief Superintendent Woods, he was making the point, the City West protests, obviously, which we covered, riots is what they were, and the Dublin riots from a couple of years back. He described both those events as not planned and reactive particular events. Now, we know what those events are. In City West, it's alleged that a very young juvenile girl was seriously sexually assaulted. And the Dublin riots started after a man stabbed a number of people, including children, in Parnell Square. So what the detective was saying was that these events, the protests and the violence that followed were not planned. But in saying that, he also acknowledged that there was involvement of the far right in a significant way particularly in terms of spreading disinformation. And in the more recent City West protests, members of the far right, as we saw, were actually present during the protests and riots.
Yeah, but it's a different thing, I suppose, when he's saying the people are dealt with. Then they riot. Some of them have pled guilty. Certainly in the Dublin riots, we've seen lots of people plead guilty, and they've been dealt with by the criminal justice system for rioting. But, some of these other organisations that they fear will be dealt with maybe as terrorist organisations. Yes,
well, in City West, I think there's over 30 or around 30 people have been charged so far, and I think there's been almost 40 arrests. But all of those charges are for essentially public order or violent disorder charges. None of them are related to far right activity.
So I mean, he spoke as well about the dissident threat, which of course even 10 years ago that would have been the primary work of them, particularly if you go back to maybe slightly over 10 years ago when you had Alan Ryan gang, for example, the Dublin Brigade of the Real IRA in operation, and dissidents were involved in all sorts of criminal activity and up to murders and extortion, very high profile and very dangerous. The dissident threat is definitely diminished.
Very much so, and he acknowledged that. The fact is, Niall, there hasn't been a single prosecution in the Republic of Ireland this year in relation to dissident republicanism. So the detective was making the point that the threat level in relation to that has very much gone down. And he, ever since really, he was saying since the times of the Good Friday Agreement, it's slowly, it's gone very much down. But he said there is still a threat level here. It's nothing compared to the threat level in Northern Ireland, where I think the threat level is officially classified as substantial. Like, there's still a lot of activity in places like Derry and stuff like that. But here in the Republic, he was saying that they monitor a small number of dissident Republicans at this stage who have hardline views. So he's not saying
it's gone.
But they are being looked at still.
And you can say, as you say, no cases come before the courts, and the amount of people in prison for dissident Republican offences is much diminished as well. And the Special Criminal Court's busier than ever, but it's really the gangland criminals.
Very much gangland criminals. I think there might be, I did a piece on it last Christmas, but I think there's only about half a dozen or less prisoners now on that wing in Portlaoise Prison.
Where
where there would have been dozens. Even 10 years ago.
Yeah, and most of them are the younger guys who were surrounded with Alan Ryan, who ended up in prison for crimes committed as part of that operation. But
there are a few in there actually in relation to the murder of Peter Butterley.
That's right.
And if you take them out of the equation, I think there might be only one or two others. That's it.
Yeah. So the Special Detective Unit is they rarely do interviews. Probably they had the reputation of being the least accessible of the Garda. You're less likely to see them being interviewed almost than anywhere, whereas some other units are much more likely to speak. Is there, do you think, an opening up in terms of the media? I mean, were they regarded as kind of the Secret Service, really, aren't they?
Well, they essentially are. Ireland is unique in that case, in that the SDU is responsible for, as you say, Secret Service, that end of things. We don't have an independent Secret Service. So their remit is huge. We've been just touching on a couple of things that they do. They're in charge. Like, we had the Ukrainian president here this week. They would have had an oversight in what was a huge security operation in Dublin on Tuesday for his visit. They would have been responsible and in charge of all that kind of thing. When Ireland is hosting the EU presidency start next July, they'll be in charge of all the security in relation to dignitaries, everyone visiting. The security, there's going to be multiple events. So that's another aspect of it.
So they'd be drawing up the security threat, I suppose, would they? For example, if Zelensky is here, is there, Russian agents or any fear coming from that?
It would have been snipers on roofs and stuff yesterday, Niall, for that visit. But actually the Chief Superintendent, he pointed out that they've actually been planning for the EU presidency for over a year now at this stage. So it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And going back to the far right, he feels that the threat from them, is going to increase because Ireland is hosting such an event.
Yeah, and you'll have some of the people that are particular targets for the far right in and out of the country.
Yes.
Okay, and it's very interesting. It's certainly the terror threats continue to change, and the state have to always change their operation to match them.
Sound out.
Thanks.